the most significant thing that has happened in India is that there have been a spate of legislation, and that spate has really dealt with criminal law and with violence against women. But let us see, has it had any effect, do you think, all this? Every time there has been tremendous criticism, or the women's movement have agitated that offenses like rape, dowry violence, dowry death, domestic violence, nothing is being done about it. The government rapidly has put something on the statute book. So the legislator has put it and he has forgotten about it. But the other two branches, the executive and the judiciary, have never been taken into confidence. What is the purpose of the legislation? And therefore, when you come to think of it, session after session in Parliament, we get figures of increasing violence against women. Wouldn't you say that, Naina?
Yes, I totally agree. And I think that the point is that the legislative response is always one based on reaction, just like the women's movement to some extent has also been. We've always reacted case by case to incidences of violence. And then when we wanted to influence legal reform, or we've actually solicited legal reform as an answer to some of these problems, the lesson that we've learned is that as soon as it leaves the political will of the women's movement, it enters the legislative form, which has no perspective on how to address the law or the new law they want to pass in terms of a woman's perspective. We put in all our energy in developing this law and saying this has been the experience and ground reality of women who have experienced violence. And we give it to the legislature, who then says, okay, this is the kind of language we have to adopt in order to pass a law to deal with violence. But it simply eliminates a perspective. It simply, when it passes law.
Yes, but Naina, I go even a little more. I would say that let us take the case of rape. The things that were really upsetting before there was this agitation, that what is rape? It is up to the woman to prove that she had not consented. Okay, so whether it was the Law Commission or whether it was the women's movement, all of us said that that is impossible for the woman to have to prove. Second thing, if there is no marks of resistance on her body, if her clothes are not torn, she must have consented. And now these were things we objected very violently to, and as a matter of fact, even the Law Commission took some of these things up. And again, this last, that there should be no reference to her past sexual history. Now you just take it, you see the government quickly passed a legislation on rape, but even the suggestions, forget the women's suggestions of the women's movement, even the suggestions of the Law Commission, they were not bothered about. And even today, we are having cases from the judiciary where they say, loose charactered woman, no trace of violence, so you know she must have consented. And if you are not a virgin, according to them, you must have consented to sexual intercourse. So it's really that not only that they are not prepared to put what we think, but even the Law Commission, which is not a women's body, they are not even willing to go really to the extent that the law is going to be in any way effective. Therefore, you just look at the rape law. What are the figures of rape? Custodial rape, we thought we had achieved something wonderful, that if the woman says she has been raped in custody, then fine. Now look, the report of the PUDR has shown that there are so many of these custodial rapes still going on and no convictions. And so, you know, it just doesn't make sense. They put something on and forget all about it. The lack of political will is what is really causing this, and the judicial attitude.
I really wonder when women will begin to matter in the law, because I think that when the law looks at a woman, she comes before the courtroom, or she comes before her first approach to the law is either through the police, maybe through an organization, but more often than not through the police. And she's come there fairly reluctantly, because most people, forget women, most people find it very difficult to step into a police station. At which point you're up against a system which simply disbelieves what women say, which doesn't take certain crimes seriously. Today there is such a spate of visibility around child sexual abuse. It's not that it hasn't been there, it's just something that's much more apparent now. How many people in the judicial system, whether they're the police or the judges, are ready to believe that child sexual abuse exists, and exists most commonly within the family? Because after all, that's yet one more thing, one more incident. When we talk about violence, it's always an incident that really threatens family, because it's most common within the family, that so-called safe haven. So she's up against a system which is completely biased towards her, which says that you must be lying, this cannot be possible, because family is actually the ultimate safe haven for anybody. It's a provider for the woman. It's the economic basis for survival for the child, the woman, and extended family as well. And suddenly she's saying something which is threatening all of that. And violence is, it's a brutal concept. You won't get many people you get people who might confess to murder, but you won't get people confessing to child sexual abuse, especially if they're the father of that child. And I do think that the legal system is not yet prepared to take issues around sexual abuse or violence seriously enough. When we go into the process of going to the court, how many women go to court? You have, we're the second largest litigating society in the world. And the majority of people going to court are men. Women, it doesn't mean women don't have legal problems. They just don't want to go to court to solve them. And also because most legal problems revolve around them becoming public. And being public means facing a certain degree of humiliation. So what kind of confidence is that for a woman?
Yeah, but when you mentioned child abuse, and I would like to remind you of one thing. When a girl of 8 was abused by her friend's uncle, whom she treated as an uncle, the case went on for 12 years, I think, or 10 years. And at the end of it, the judge says so much money will be given to her as compensation because her future has been blighted, etc. Now you tell me, if a rape case is going to take 10 years, and all you can think of is that there should be a compensation given to her so that, her future, what is her future? She will not be able to get married. You see, that is the other thing which is so very annoying, that even the judges sit there and say, that now look what has happened to this poor woman, she will never be able to get married, therefore let this money go to her and she will build up a life. How on earth are we going to change this type of an attitude? And I don't know, Naina, what your feelings are, but I really feel that in this decade, from the first decade to the second, that is since 85 onwards, in India at least, there hasn't been truly change in the attitude of the judiciary. Even when you talk about they say various things, but you come down to a sentence in a rape case, they will say 6 years is enough, 3 years is enough. A woman who has been raped by the police in the hotel twice, and they said, terrible, nothing can be worse than this. But when it comes to the punishment, you give only 4 years. And yet the mandatory minimum is being violated. And what are you violating? On what grounds are you violating? And the judges do set up a standard, by which people will go. It's not even that only the police are insensitive, Police are, of course, insensitive, as you said. You go to a court and complain about cruelty of the family, and the police has said, there's one case which we knew, but they said, now this is nothing. I also give my wife a beating when she doesn't behave properly. So what are you complaining about? It happens in every household. I mean, one can not understand. It is because you have not given the training to the police to understand what gender sensitization means, and same with the judiciary. So what is the use of a good law also? Even assuming we had a good law, are we really going to be able to achieve anything, I wonder,
I think that I don't necessarily feel that India is an exception, even after a decade. I mean, I think when we change in leaps and bounds. We skip the middle road, unlike other countries in the world. But when it comes to issues of gender, I do think that there is a commonality. It's a universal thing that you'll find judgments across the board which are prejudicial towards women. You'll find exceptional judgments which will talk in terms of gender language. We don't have that, there's no doubt about it. But you know, the judges or the judiciary is like the last bastion in some ways, because the learning resistance that a judicial person has is unlike any other, because the judiciary is ensconced in this position of power, somewhat removed from the rest of society because there is protocol, there is hierarchy. Unlike the police, we can still walk into a room and talk to policemen about issues around gender. To walk into a room of judges and judicial officers is not so easy, because there is this assumption of power and learning and knowledge, which they will not accredit to other people. And when it comes to something like gender, it does face a lot of learning resistance from members of the judiciary. They feel that this notion of being neutral, without accepting that neutrality is also gender blind. They think that that is an asset, or it's a positive facet in the judiciary. But if two people come to a courtroom, a man and a woman, you have to first assume, you cannot assume that they're coming to you on an equal footing. That woman, if she comes in a divorce case, is coming from an unequal situation within the family. And until I think the judicial perception accepts that she comes from an unequal situation, he or she, as a judicial officer, will not be able to address her problem with a gender sensitivity. He will simply assume that I will be neutral on the basis of the facts of the case.
Yes, I know. I want to mention something else to you, and I don't know what you feel about it. The other very major thing that has happened is this growing violence of dowry, which is began with violence, it is now ending in death. We have put dowry death as an offense in the thing. But tell me, this resistance that we have in society in boycotting people who are giving dowry, the government's resistance to declaring that ostentatious marriages are wrong and should not happen. Now these are things, how are we going to explain that if we really mean to curb dowry, that various other things have to happen also? Government's resistance to ostentatious marriages, government's resistance to changing the property law and saying that a man, the father or mother, cannot will away or gift away the entire property and deprive the heirs. Now you see, these things, unless they come, all this legislation, I think, is really meaningless, you know. And now people say very openly, oh, IAS officers so much, doctors so much. That is, we don't even think that these are things that we should be really ashamed of. Yet dowry death figures in this. Now this, on one hand. On the other, even a good provision of law which we have, which I'm quite proud of really, is cruelty to the wife. That is 498A, where they say, if the woman is trained that any cruelty, don't wait for something terrible to happen, but cruelty, mental or physical, go to the police station and the husband or the in-laws can be arrested at once. Now there again, we feel that this can only succeed if you link it up with dowry. You would just say that cruelty because they wanted more dowry. Yet it's not only for dowry that this is something which I find so difficult, that you're ill-treating a woman because she's had a daughter. Has nothing whatsoever to do with dowry. The man wants to get rid of her and marry somebody, ill-treats her. But this 498A, I don't know what you feel about it. I think that is one good piece of law which came, but it has not been made clear that what is the purpose of 498A.
And partly because the reason it's not been made clear, and I agree with you, I think it's a very progressive section for us, is because when, again, it's a criminal complaint. Women go and file it in the police station. Police people have an assumption that if you file this, first of all, you have to show there's a dowry demand. and which is wrong. It's
Which
an
is wrong,
inaccurate
yes.
interpretation of the section.
Ah.
But the second thing they will do is they sort of break down a woman's resistance, in the sense they will say, what about your economic dependence on this man? Okay, and then the threat is, we will put him into jail, but you will suffer. Finally, I think when women actually do this, the people who I think have been made least accountable are her own parents. And frankly, I feel in a situation of dowry, the extent to which parents of a girl should be made accountable, or should be hauled up, or somewhere should be made to feel that actually they are marketing their child, that they are selling her for a sum, for a price, because she only will get social acceptability if they pay for her marriage and her acceptance within a marital context. I think that we let a lot of the girls' parents get away with that. I think the positive experience out of all of this, though, is that having learned that, yes, we are in a system which is not gender friendly, which does not have a perspective which is in favor of women or understands the ground reality that women have to face. The fact is that we still have one of the most dynamic women's movements in the world. And that has proved itself at the grassroots level with the numbers of women who are now empowered, irrespective of what the law is doing. It's I think, a fantastic thing in this country. If we look at even early years in the early 1980s, when we had the first National Women's Conference, there were 150 women in Bombay City. At the last National Women's Conference, there were 4,000 women, 80% of whom came from grassroots or were rural women, and had a facility to communicate with one another on a vast number of issues.
I want to tell you just one incident which will really make bear you what you're saying out also. We have this project in Bankura,
Yes.
of the tribal women, Santhal women, and they were very keen after some time to find out what were their legal rights. See, so as workers, and this is, please, Naina, how they put it to me, we want to know what our rights are as workers, because we don't have enough work for the whole year, so we do have to go and work in somebody else's field or somebody else's house. So what are our rights then? Then these husbands very often turn us out of the house. Well, what rights do we have with our children? And against him also. And the last one is, I don't know where they found out, there are some other rights which we have heard about, which everybody shares in India. We want to know about that. It took me some time to understand constitutional rights, you see, they were talking about. And then, in their village, they have a mixed thing, So there was a Hindu man who got rid of his first wife and married another girl. So these women turned up and said, we are going now to the police station to report you, and you will be arrested, because we know that Hindu law doesn't allow you to marry twice. Whatever our law is, we have to change it. But Hindu law has already been changed. So you are going to be arrested. So this man didn't believe it at first. These women marched off to the panchayat and gave this message. The panchayat knew how determined these women were. But the point is, they had picked it up that the Hindus cannot marry a second time. This part of it, I agree with you, we often tend to forget this, that they are the people who have been really empowered. Also, if you go to the police cell here, the number of women who come because they have heard about 498A.
Yes.
And really major cases are cruel, the husbands have done this, or my mother-in-law has done that. So I really feel if we could really do a little more to let them know what the law is or what the law can do for them, I think they can get up in court and argue much better than we have been able to do really so far.
And also this whole notion of empowerment is also seeping into law schools a little bit. I mean, we're making very limited progress, but it's definitely there. It's not an issue that can be ignored anymore. That women's rights is a human rights issue. I don't think that that's something that everybody can simply turn a blind eye to and say that this is not a concern for us. And so you have found that there is much more discussion, especially in light of maybe this conference, Also, the government of India has ratified that Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, which is a positive step.
It's not a positive, and it's also a credit to the women's movement because the amount of pressure they put that the government should ratify it. Well, that was really
It's been a very effective lobby. And I think unlike any other document or legality that we have, that's one document which sets out a Bill of Rights for women and simplifies law, which is usually this very complex labyrinth. And I think that is a very empowering thing when you have rights that you can understand, which are simplified in a very basic document. Women understand their rights. They understand, like you're saying, that I'm getting less than this person. That doesn't seem right to me, you know. Or that I'm having a baby, you know. I have a right to have some time off to have this baby, okay? It's not as if they don't understand those rights. I think what they need and what they are getting to some extent is a collective of women who will endorse those rights and say, you have a right for this.
Yes, exactly.
They always need reaffirmation, am I right? If they have to act in isolation, that's when I think the problem is.
That I absolutely agree with you. That this isolation is something, you know, but when they work together and they realize that the problems are common. And you know, I went once somewhere, Bihar, Odisha, West Bengal, the women had come from, and within 5 minutes they realized that their problems were really very common. You know, they had no difficulty. You and I might take some time to establish our rapport, but these women don't.